Hello all you spell-slinging cosmonauts, as always I am Cosmic, and today we're going to be reviewing Rogue Wizards, which is an indie RPG roguelike developed by one-man studio Spellbind Studios. The project itself originated on Kickstarter, where it was successfully funded to the tune of just over $70,000. The game is set in the world of Rifflenor, whereby you play a young thief who is trying to rob an inn, and during that robbery you find yourself picking up a scroll that is aimed at you, and the scroll transports you to a dungeon whereby you meet another player and you find out that you are essentially a magic user, even though you thought that was impossible, and it is your task to save the world from a guild of wizards who are taking over the world. So let's get right into the good stuff of the mechanics. Now, like I've said, the game is a roguelike, so it has all the elements of a roguelike that you would come to expect. There is permadeath, there is turn-based combat, randomly generated dungeons, and of course a various amount of loot and character progression. The game has two different modes, one being story mode, where you can experience the story, and it is all text-based story, so be prepared to read somewhat. The writing itself is fairly well written and does contain a little bit of humour and some nice references to video game culture. So let's talk about the dungeon crawling element, which is of course the core of the game. Now, essentially dungeon crawling works very similar to more traditional roguelikes in the genre, whereby it is a tile-based, turn-based system. So as your character moves from tile to tile, that essentially equates to a turn, and as you move, enemies will also move as well. You are only able to ever see a couple of tiles in front of you in any direction, which means that you are unable to see around corners, and specifically you're unable to see what's coming up ahead, so you can plan accordingly, which adds the unknown element of a roguelike in that sense. I have to say that I was very impressed with the quality of the game. It ultimately, in its core mechanics, not only were the core mechanics solid, there's nothing particularly innovative in this. It's all been done before in various other games, but it's ultimately executed to a very high standard, which makes it a pleasure to play. The best part of the dungeon crawling is of course the turn-based combat, and with that you have a various arsenal of weaponry and spells to use. Now, spells themselves are going to be more than likely your most powerful ally. There are over 18 upgradable spells across 6 skills of magic, including one called Cosmic, which I quite liked, and ultimately you can upgrade these spells. Now, these spells, they do have a limited use, so for example you have to keep finding the energy requirements that they need, and you can pick those up off the dead enemies, etc, etc, and you can also craft these in cauldrons. And on top of that, you also have your various arsenal of weaponry, which there's tons and tons of weapons around to find, each randomly generated with different enchantments and spells. There's legendary items, which of course my favorite, there's rare items, there's common items, and then you also have your various armors and trinkets available that you can equip, which will affect not only your defense but various stats as well. As you progress through, you will of course gain levels as your character levels up and gains enough experience, and these levels essentially take the form of being able to upgrade and purchase new spells, and of course affect your core stats, which come in the form of power, stamina and finesse, which of course correspond to various things such as damage you do with weapons and spells. Any good dungeon crawler, and any good roguelike for that matter, will have of course a progression of difficulty. Now, Rogue Wizards does theirs very well. Not only have you a huge variety of enemies to face, but you also have different levels of each of those enemies. So you have the weaker version, then you'll have the stronger version, and then on top of that you have bosses and sub-bosses. So you have the main bosses of the story, which are of course the guild wizards, which are incredibly tough to take down, but then you also have separate bosses on various different dungeons that maybe aren't even related to the main quest, and you will have to take those down. Each of those have different tactics and different abilities to use. Once you've completed a dungeon, you'll be able to go back to the town, and essentially the town has an array of facilities for you to use, such as an armory for armor, blacksmithing for weapons, you have a potions master, you will have various different things for you to do. Now, as you are also dungeoneering, you can pick up companions and pets, and after their cooldown and they're fully rested, you're able to take companions and pets on dungeons to help you out. Once you're complete with the story mode, you can run the Gauntlet Mode, which gets even more progressively harder, and there is of course no normal mode on Gauntlet Mode, so you have to do the hard mode, which is I do anyway, which includes the permadeath option, etc, etc, and it is completely unforgiving but also a lot of fun. One thing that I really loved about Rogue Wizards was the art style, the cartoon aesthetic that they produced. I thought it was really nice. It helped to really enforce the different areas in terms of how they looked and how vibrant the color palettes were, and everything looked really nice. The sound effects too worked really well. The soundtrack isn't anything to write home about, but ultimately it serves its purpose where it's supposed to. For me, Rogue Wizards is one of those indie roguelikes that it just really makes you appreciate how good indie games can be. The game is so well executed, it is so well put together, it's fluid, it feels fun, it's fast paced, and it's very difficult to make a turn-based game feel fast paced and feel like you are progressing at a reasonable rate, and Rogue Wizards does that really well. And in terms of problems, in terms of negatives, there aren't really that many. The ones that I would have with the game are inherent to the type of game it is. There aren't problems with graphics, there aren't problems with core mechanics, everything works as intended. Now, that being said, you also have, in that core design an inherent RNG, which means that some runs you are going to get a bit of bad luck, and that's just the way it is with these games. And so if you don't like RNG, if you don't like procedurally generated dungeons, you don't like randomized items, then you're probably not going to like this, because ultimately you can have one run, for example, where I got a legendary on my first run, in my first dungeon at the very start of the game, which pretty much lasted me, for the next 5, 6, 7 dungeons. Then again, I played again and I didn't get any decent equipment for like 3 dungeons and died on one of the bosses, and that was a quick run. And it's inherent to the nature of the game, and ultimately, apart from that RNG, that randomly generated idea and randomly generated items, and that idea that one run can go really well, one run can really not go really well, there isn't really any negatives and any problems with the games. It's exactly the way it's supposed to be. It's executed really well, and ultimately it is one of those games that should be held up as an example to other developers to say, if you want to execute a game, this is how you do it. You make it like this. And I think Rogue Wizards certainly deserves all the success that it has. So for me, ultimately, I certainly recommend it. If you're a fan of dungeon crawlers, you're a fan of roguelikes, that kind of thing, it is certainly going to be right up your alley, and you're going to get a lot of enjoyment from this, especially for the price tag. If you don't like roguelikes, you don't like randomly generated dungeons, you don't like randomly generated items, then, this isn't going to be for you. That being said, it is one of the lesser extreme RNGs. It's fairly easy to get into. There's no real reason why people who don't like more hardcore roguelikes won't be able to get into Rogue Wizards, because it's fairly easy to pick up and play. All of its mechanics are very simple, they gel together really well, and I think that people who might shy away from more hardcore roguelikes might enjoy Rogue Wizards to a certain point. So that is my review of Rogue Wizards. Thank you so much for watching and listening. As always, please let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and please share on social media, and as always, I will see you next time.